Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Mental Health Awareness session. My name is Jay. I'm a scout from the UK. I also work in mental health as a therapist, a mental health nurse, as well as delivering mental health first aid training. Our focus today is just understanding a little bit more about mental health, what it is, what you can do to look after yourself, but also thinking about what you can do to look after other people as well. Just as a bit of self-care, look after yourself as we go through this topic. Mental health means something to all of us. So it's important that as we go through this content, we look after ourselves and we think about it in a gentle way. Do opt out of anything that you feel uncomfortable doing or thinking about. We also have the Safe from Harm team available if you wish to speak to somebody. So when we're thinking about mental health, it's important that we think about health to start with. So we think more broadly about these three aspects. Social health in terms of our communities, our access to water, to security, to education, our physical health in terms of our physiological health and our actual body itself, and then mental, which is what we're thinking about today. So it's important to recognize that sometimes in all of these areas, we are well and sometimes we're unwell, and sometimes one area affects the other. So if your physical health is impacted, your mental health will impact that as well. If your mental health is impacted, it will affect your social and physical health. But we can't just talk about mental health in isolation, and we can't talk about health broadly without thinking about mental health. So if we're scouts thinking about health initiative, we've got to have mental health in there. Otherwise, we're not going to be thinking about the whole person. So what is mental health? I like this definition here from the World Health Organization. Essentially, it's defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, fruitfully, and is able to contribute to his or her community. Now, the reason I like that is because to me, as a scout, it sounds like a scout definition, or it sounds like it's got something to do with scouting, working with stresses, working productively and fruitfully, contributing to her community or his community, realizing potential. These are all words that you would very easily use to describe scouting. And I think that's important because for the last 100, 110, 15 years, scouting has contributed to mental health. We have always had something to do with mental health, but perhaps we need to think about it more consciously within scouting. Perhaps we need to be more deliberate about how we think about mental health in scouting. Whether or not you're a youth member or a leader or taking people on camp, mental health is part of that journey for sure. So it's about how we think. Has anybody had any thoughts today? What is a thought? A thought is a word or an image or an idea that we have in our mind. It's how we feel. So our emotions are very much physical and emotional reactions to situations and scenarios or events that might be happening, and how we behave. So this is in terms of what we might do or don't do. Perhaps it's about how we conduct ourselves, how we put ourselves across. So you can see that this is a pretty big topic because it covers all of human behavior and interaction, but it's also about how we value ourselves, how we see ourselves and the world around us. It's about how we experience things every day. Mental health is something that every single human in scouting and in the world has and experiences every day. Sometimes people think about mental health being a new thing or something that perhaps isn't, it's been only talked about for the last 10 years, perhaps. But the reality is, all our human history has involved mental health. You tell me one story, one song throughout human history that hasn't, to some extent, involved mental health. Everything from Shakespeare to Socrates to classic stories to campfire songs, to some level, has mental health involved. So this psychology, the mind, how we think and how we feel has been part of our human history for thousands of years. I want you to think about these 4 areas and how they might change in a particular situation. Because actually, if we understand this, we've got some basic ideas around how our mental health may change and shift in time. So, for example, those 4 areas that I described, so thoughts in terms of thinking, emotions, those tend to be what if an emotion is, if it's more than one word, it's probably a thought. So some pretty standard emotions might be anger, happy, sad, fear, jealousy. Those are the kind of core emotions, perhaps, or primary and secondary emotions, a bit like primary and secondary colours. We've got our physical reactions and we've got our behaviour. So if you think about walking into your scout venue, your scout meeting place, in front of all your friends, and you stub your toe, what sort of thoughts might go through your head? What sort of emotions? What sort of physical reactions? How might you behave? However you were feeling before you stubbed your toe or hurt your toe will have been changed by stubbing your toe. So that's the situation. And perhaps you might think you might be embarrassed. So that's the emotional reaction. You might think, oh no, I've done this. Why did I do that? I'm so silly. Or you might think, who put that thing there that I've hit my toe on? So that we have all these reactions and interactions, but internally, but also in terms of the environment as well. So who is in that room will very much affect how we feel. If we were by ourselves in that moment, would we react differently to if we were in front of other people? So just taking that simple response of stubbing your toe, can you see how complicated this becomes very quickly? And how actually in the long term, our mental health can really be impacted by events, by life opportunities or lack of opportunities, perhaps. They could also be affected by scouting, having the opportunity to go camping or to learn skills or to interact on, for example, with Joti, interact with people from all around the world. What an incredible opportunity that is. And how does that affect the way we see the world? That ability to bring people together around a campfire or around a Zoom call like this, for example, means that we interact with people that we wouldn't normally in our kind of everyday lives. And that can expand our minds and expand the way we see the world. Mental health can be seen as on a continuum. And what I mean by this is that it's maybe oversimplistic, but our mental health is on a sliding scale. And where your mental health is right now will be different to how it's been in the past, and will be different to how it is in the future. How you wake up in the morning, your mental health will be different by the time you go to sleep at night. So our mental health, just like our physical health, is on a sliding scale. It's never in the same place twice, and it's always shifting and changing. Sometimes small things can shift it a little bit, and then big life events can shift it a long way. Any change or any adversity can certainly change our mental health as well. And it's also, it's just helpful to think, what are the things that might help my mental health improve? What are the traps and what are the pitfalls that I might have that may move my mental health downwards towards illness? So what I'd like you to do is to just comment any questions you might have at this point, just so that by the time we get towards the end of the webinar, you've given us a few questions to have a think about. So if anybody wants to ask any questions, please feel free to put that in the question and answer section. So mental health has always been relevant to Scouting, and we know that young people and adult volunteers benefit in terms of their mental health from being in Scouting. We know that Scouting increases resilience in young people. We know when we study this, we find that Scouts are more resilient and have a lot more positive outcomes than people that weren't involved in Scouting or guiding, actually. We also know that there's a huge amount of stigma and judgment and criticism when it comes to mental health in our society. And it almost exists in every society around the world, where perhaps there's judgment or shame associated with mental health. And that means that Scouting's role may be to also influence people positively in their attitudes towards mental health. I just want you to think about how Scouting might have influenced your mental health in terms of your mood and the way you look at the world, because it's also important that sometimes in Scouting we can have difficult experiences or fall out with people or have stress from Scouting. So it can also be that at times Scouting negatively affects our mental health too. And that's important to name and acknowledge. But by and large, I'm sure everyone is aware, Scouting positively influences people and also influences their ability to support other people, from doing a good deed every day to being able to have your ideas and your principles shared and encouraged. So, for example, being a patrol leader gives you the opportunity to be in a leadership role. So that's pretty cool, isn't it? We can also create a better world by reducing stigma and increasing our skills and supporting others. So feel free to answer any, put any Q&A, ask any questions in the Q&A, more than welcome to. So I want to introduce this analogy to you called the stress bucket. The idea is that we all have a capacity to deal with what the world throws at us. We all have a capacity to take on challenges and deal with adversity, perhaps. And if we think about it as a stress bucket, we all have this capacity. And what happens is that stressful life events or changes flow into that bucket. And the idea is that bucket may rise and fall at times. Perhaps at times our bucket is more full than at other times. And stressful life events could be positive and negative. Have a think yourself. What are some negative stressful events that I've been through? What are some positive stressful events I've been through? People will often say things like entering into a relationship, getting a job, getting a promotion, passing an exam, for example, can be stressful because that rise and fall of like relief perhaps for passing it or not passing it, that stress by and large can be good and bad events. It's probably too simple to talk about it as good and bad. They are just stressful life events. So let's think about it in terms of this stress flows into the bucket. So think about what sort of pressures might be on you and think about that in terms of that going into the bucket. And when that bucket gets too full, it doesn't take a lot for one small event to really affect us and for that bucket to overflow. And sometimes that might look like people getting angry or upset, or perhaps withdrawing as well. I know personally, when I get overwhelmed, I'm more somebody that might withdraw and become quiet, procrastinate and avoid. But other people may get angry or irritable. Some people might get irritable and then withdraw because they feel embarrassed that they've got irritable. But we all have unique ways of showing our stress. And if you're thinking, well, my partner, my friend, my fellow leader, my fellow volunteer, my fellow young person in a unit perhaps, or a jamboree unit perhaps, and what is it like when they get stressed? What do they look like? How do they behave? Because maybe I can help them if I notice this happening. And maybe I notice in myself when I get stressed, and maybe I can do something positively to help my stress levels at that moment. In this analogy, we also have taps on the side of the bucket. And the idea of taps is that they're coping skills and activities, things that allow us to unwind, things that allow us to take some of that pressure out. So, for example, it might be a holiday, it might be going for a run, it might be having a bath, it might be reading a book, listening to music, doing yoga, playing football, going to scouts, of course. Our ability to release some of this stress is really key, because the more we can release from ourselves, the more we can get rid of this stress, the better. The nature of it is, though, that if we didn't have any stress at all, our life would be pretty dull. We need some pressure. We need things to motivate us, to encourage us to push ourselves, perhaps. But we also need those outlets as well. Perhaps on a piece of paper, just for your own reflection, you could write or draw this bucket, this model, and think about it later in time. What's in your stress container? What are the things on the horizon that might be about to go in? And also, what are the things that you do to cope? Sometimes those taps get blocked because perhaps we stop doing the things that we enjoy. Perhaps it's coming up towards some exams and you think, I'm too stressed, I won't go to scouts. But the problem is, if we don't go to scouts and we don't get that tap to release that pressure, we're just going to get more and more full. And the fuller our bucket, the less we're able to think clearly, and the less we're able to process, the less we're able to revise, for example. So whilst we may prioritize exams and revision at times, we also need to make sure that there's times where we switch off and where we get that release. Otherwise, we might be staring at a book or trying to relax, trying to revise, but we're simply not getting there because we're too stressed. Sometimes what might happen as well is that our buckets become really full and we stop using those taps, or perhaps we do things that may be unhelpful. For example, we might stay up all night studying, and it might mean that those buckets, we release some of those stresses because we've done something that's maybe made us work really hard, but it's more like the tap has got a hose pipe attached and it's flowing back around and going back into the bucket again. For that period of time that we've released that stress, there's a relief, but then longer term, that's going to catch up on us and make the bucket more full. So things like self-harm, alcohol use, drug use, becoming angry at people, it can give us a release in the short term, but long term it makes things worse. So it's also important to think, what are my things that are pure releases that allow me to relax, that allow me to switch off, and what are the things that maybe have a negative side effect as well? What are the things that refill those buckets, either because the things I do are unhelpful for me long term, or because they make me feel guilty or they make me feel shame afterwards? So think about this stress container, and it may be worth doing this with close friends or family and thinking about, what do we need to do to make sure I and you have these taps open so that we can allow some of that stress to pass through. So just to build on that, really, when you were thinking about what are those taps, what are those things that are helpful for me to do, I want you to think about it in terms of these three areas. Things that give me a sense of achievement. So that might be some sort of thing that I've managed to do or complete or work towards. Things that give me a sense of closeness and connection with other people. And things that give me a sense of enjoyment or fun, perhaps. So these three areas have got to be meaningful to you. So it's got to be it's got to be enjoyable for you, or close, make you feel close, or make you feel a sense of achievement. There's no point in me telling you what will be helpful for you, because I don't know you. You've got to think, what's meaningful to me, what's meaningful in a way that I can really connect with this topic, what's helpful for me, and working out what those options might look like, and trying to increase them in your life. And that's the sort of thing that's going to allow that stress container to be managed. There's a lovely tool called the Great Dream Model from Action for Happiness, and I'd certainly recommend having a look at that in terms of finding things of meaning and doing meaningful activities. So a little bit about looking after yourself. It's important that you look after yourself first. I'm sure a lot of us have done physical first aid training and thought about things like the doctor's ABC, and that first aid model. And that D right at the start stands for danger. Look after yourself. Make sure you keep safe first. So that's really important for us to think about. It's important that we prioritize our own mental health, because sometimes people prioritize other people's, but at the end of the day, if we don't look after ourselves, we can't help other people. Boundaries are key. So if you're helping other people, make sure you have a limit. You can't do everything for everybody all of the time. You need a limit to the amount you can support somebody, because if not, you're going to burn yourself out or stress yourself too much, and then there'll be two people with need. So if you're concerned about somebody, it's important that you seek help for them or for yourself in that time. And some general points here on supporting other people. One of the key things that people try and do is that when somebody comes to them with something difficult, they want to try and solve their problems. They want to try and make things better. And that's okay. I get that sort of desire to help somebody. However, the best way people can help, people can improve and to help their own mental health is to help themselves with a bit of support from a trusted friend. But it involves you not just throwing advice at them or telling them what to do. It's important that they have time and you listen to them patiently and empathetically so that they can work out what they need to do. And perhaps if they're really stuck, maybe you can suggest some things, but be very, very slow and gentle with your advice. Actually, advice is often not what people are looking for. Sometimes people just need to get whatever's going around in their head out of their head. And once it's out of the head, they can make more sense of it. And in that time, they can find their own way for what they can do next. Be patient as well. These things take time. Sometimes we can think, oh, this problem isn't that big. I could have dealt with this. And that may be true. But there'll be things in your life that you will also struggle with, and they might not. It's just because somebody might be struggling with it doesn't mean other people won't. And just because they're struggling with it doesn't make them any less of a person or any less intelligent or caring or whatever it might be. It's just something that we all struggle with different things. Never dismiss their worries or talk down their worries. Oh, that's nothing to worry about. Talk it through with them. They're clearly worried, and telling somebody what not to feel isn't going to be helpful. Sometimes you hear people say, just think positively, or don't worry about that. If it was that simple, that would be great, but it's not. Being told not to worry about something certainly won't stop them worrying. They just won't tell you about it again. So asking questions, really hearing their concerns, making sure that they feel heard is so much more important than telling them what not to feel. And the biggest problem in communication is not listening. Often we just focus on our own thoughts, on our own opinions, and don't listen to that person in front of us. So just stop, acknowledge your own thoughts and say, yeah, thanks, brain. Just stay there for a moment. Tell me more about what's going on for you. And that's how we listen more effectively. Always praise as well. Thanks for telling me, because it's valuable. When people tell us something, that's a really valuable thing. But most importantly, if you're concerned about a friend or a family member or your own mental health, it's important that you seek support and safety from local agencies or local healthcare professionals, perhaps, or from adults in scouting who can signpost you and recommend you access resources. So that's everything from me today in terms of the content I had prepared. We'll give people another minute, perhaps, to just ask any questions, but I can't see any questions at the moment. But I hope you found today's webinar interesting, and do carry on those conversations at home and at your Scout meeting place, because I think it's important that we continue this conversation around mental health. So thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. There's a link on the chat for the badge that you can earn.